Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears, and I guess I'm going to keep talking about the biggest topic in college basketball right now, and that is this wild story and the wild just chaos at Kentucky. And the plan coming into our Friday show was not to talk about Kentucky again. We've talked about them enough. They're not a very good basketball team right now. And on Thursday's show, I went so far as to actually put out a list of candidates that I think they should call if somehow John Calipari finds another job somewhere else and decides to leave the program this offseason. But at the same time, while I was not planning to talk about Kentucky again, something happened on Thursday that feels like, oh, we got to come back to Kentucky. And it was an article from my old buddy, Kyle Tucker of The Athletic. He and I, through the years, have not seen eye to eye on a lot of things. He said some things to me. I've said some things to him. But the one thing I'll say about Kyle, he's a good reporter. He's on top of things in Lexington. And while I may disagree with him on certain things, it doesn't change the fact that he's really good at his job. And so I bring it up because on Thursday, he put out a report that was really, really, really damning, not just to John Calipari, but to the entire athletic department as a whole, that basically painted the entire athletic department basically in chaos, problems between Calipari and Mitch Barnhart, the AD. And so I want to get into it because while the report certainly does not excuse John Calipari, and in some ways there are things that actually make him look worse as a head coach, it does kind of restructure the conversation about Kentucky and how much blame should be going on Calipari for the team's struggles this year, because frankly, it seems like a lot of this actually falls on the administration as well. So let's get into it. Let me give you a few kind of details from the case. But first of all, as I said, it doesn't paint the basketball picture in the greatest light as well. And I think the one thing that really stood out from the article was that apparently John Calipari, and we watch Kentucky, they don't look very good. They don't look very well prepared. One thing the article said was that Calipari actually has graduate assistants and low-level staffers doing the team's scouting reports. What I can tell you is that in all of my years covering college basketball, I have never heard at the high major level, certainly, but even at the mid and low major level, of a GA or somebody other than an assistant coach doing a scouting report. Part of the reason why at the high major level, you pay assistant coaches hundreds of thousands of dollars is because they have to be able to wear a lot of hats. They have to be able to recruit. They have to be able to develop. They have to be able to, evaluate in the portal, and they got to be able to put together a game plan to beat your opponents. So that is something I've never heard of, and that is another kind of knock on John Calipari in a year where he doesn't need any more. But really, even that part of the story speaks to something else, because according to Kyle, part of the reason that assistant coaches are doing this or are not doing this is because there are not enough above board paid support staff to help John Calipari and the assistants out. So let's get into some of the damning things that the article says about the state of Kentucky athletics behind the scenes. Again, most specifically regarding the relationship with Mitch Barnhart and John Calipari. One, like I just said, apparently Calipari has pushed for more support staff and has largely been denied. What I would say is in 2023, where we are right now, the year we're currently in, if you think you're getting away with just the head coach, 3 on-court assistants, and a few support staff members, it's just not enough in 2023, okay? It isn't. Look at Nick Saban and the army of analysts that he has, and I know it's football, it's completely different. But Nick Saban is not relying on his on-the-field assistant coaches to handle every responsibility that goes in his organization. Think about Billy Napier, the famous picture of Florida with dozens, if not close to 100 support staff members. In basketball, watch an Arkansas game sometime. Eric Musselman has done a great job of building out the support staff around the assistant coaches, because in 2023, even in basketball, when you only have 13 scholarship players, you have to be not only coaching your team, preparing your team, but you got to be looking at 2-3 high school recruiting classes at the same time. You have to be evaluating players for the portal. And so you can't get away with just the support staff that you even were able to get away with 3, 4, 5 years ago. We talked about it on this show over the summer. Duke hired a quote unquote general manager in the offseason. That woman's responsibility was to build relationships with kind of the power brokers behind the scenes, the whatever, but then to handle the NIL stuff so that when Jon Scheyer goes into a home, he doesn't have to come up with the NIL pitch and the this pitch and the that pitch. He comes in, somebody else has done the work for him. So that's one, and it doesn't paint Mitch Barnhart in the best light. Two, beyond that, and this is where it gets really interesting, apparently they have no relationship at all. Now, I had heard from, people that know those two parties that they basically were not on speaking terms. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can do both. Two people can do their jobs really well working together when they don't speak. I don't think it helps things. I think we're in a communicative world where you have to be in touch with your people, especially the school's most important employee and the school, the boss of that person. But that Mitch Barnhart at this point is barely attending games and never attending practices. Now, practice, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but for an AD not to attend basketball games when you are, in fact, and we'll get to this in a minute, a basketball school, that's unheard of. All the ADs I know, they're everywhere. They're at every game possible. They're supporting their coaches. They're supporting their student athletes. They're supporting the teams. They're letting the fan base know that those coaches and those players have their support. So the fact that Mitch Barnhart forget not talking to John Calipari, he's not showing up, is not a good sign. And it keeps going. These are the two things that really struck me. One, we all remember what I just said a minute ago, the famed basketball school quotes from John Calipari that at the time I didn't think were that big of a deal. But apparently John Calipari wanted to apologize right away for it. Mitch Barnhart would not let him and publicly sided with Mark Stoops. And then the last thing, and this was the takes the cake of all takes the cakes. If you remember that basketball school comment centered around the fact that John Calipari wants a new basketball practice facility for Kentucky basketball. And the story out of The Athletic, out of Kyle Tucker, was that John Calipari had actually raised the funds privately, largely through former players that are now in the NBA making millions, that he had raised upwards of $30 million for that basketball facility. And that Mitch Barnhart, the AD, said, no, you're not doing it. You're not getting your new facility. And so what I would say about all this is a couple things. I know there are some Kentucky fans. There are some, I don't think a lot necessarily. There are some saying, well, that story was just planted by John Calipari. Things are going bad, and he wants to get the heat off of him. To which I would say, you're probably right on that. That I would not disagree with you on. This felt like a very pro Calipari for the most part story, although it wasn't that glowing. Because again, you talked about non-assistant coaches doing scouting reports. But I only bring it up to say this. Even if it was leaked by Calipari, it's a very simple yes or no question. Are the facts of the story true? And Kyle Tucker, again, for my dislike of him personally or whatever our relationship is, he's really good at his job. He's a good reporter. He's not going to print something if it isn't true. So even if it was more of a pro Calipari lean, it doesn't change the facts of the story, and it doesn't change the facts of this. This story, to me, completely changes the entire conversation about Kentucky basketball this season and really over the last couple of years. Now, yes, if you're Kentucky, you cannot lose to South Carolina at home. You cannot get embarrassed by Alabama on the road. You cannot get embarrassed by UCLA. You cannot get embarrassed by Gonzaga. There are other things going on that are not the AD's fault. They're not anybody other than the head coach's fault. When you don't show up to play for Gonzaga in a top 10 matchup in a game that everybody was excited about, that's on the head coach. When you, when you lose at home to South Carolina, I don't care how many injuries there are, you can't lose at home to South Carolina. But it does change this story to me for a little, it does change the story a little bit, because it's one thing, again, what some of the stuff that's happened with Kentucky basketball is inexcusable. I get that. But at the same time, there are obviously some mitigating factors in terms of why things are going sideways the way that they are. And it does seem as though part of this is that Calipari is not getting the support that he needs from his AD, his boss. And so that, to me, this is a huge part of the story that can't be ignored. And when I heard all this, all you have to do, I think any guy or girl listening, go to your life. We've all had bosses in our lives that in your heart of hearts doesn't believe in you, that in your heart of hearts maybe didn't want to hire you, but somebody else kind of twisted their arm. It doesn't believe in you, doesn't like you, has a vendetta against you. Well, it's one thing to have a boss that doesn't believe in you, which is clearly what's going on at Kentucky. It's another, and this is what appears to be happening according to that story, a boss that is actively sabotaging you. When you're the head coach and you believe you need a new practice facility and you take it upon yourself to raise the funds yourself and your AD steps in the way, that is actively undermining you. When you just lost a PR battle publicly with the football coach and your AD won't let you apologize for it, that is your AD actively undermining you. And so it does change my perspective on John Calipari. And I'll say this, it changes my perspective on this whole Kentucky thing. And to take things further behind the scenes, this isn't the first thing that Kentucky fans are frustrated about with this AD. There's issues with the NIL program. What is it? How good is it? By the way, Kentucky, the highest rated recruit that they've ever signed, or one of the top two, Justin Rogers, defensive tackle. He left this week, entered the portal, and signed with Auburn. I'm not saying I know what happened, but when Auburn, in its AD search and its coach search, and I have nothing but respect for Hugh Freeze, I'm not knocking him. These are the new rules. But Auburn got a new AD and a new head coach who both came because they knew the NIL program was in place at Auburn to have success. So when Kentucky loses a defensive tackle to a fellow SEC program that they've had more success than over the last couple of years, people are going to start asking questions, and most people are pinning it to NIL. And so I'm going sideways here, but the bottom line remains this. This AD already doesn't have support of a lot of the fan base, maybe even most of the fan base, because of how he's handled NIL. My buddy Matt Jones has talked about it a lot, about the fact that apparently he's not letting anybody drink alcohol at the games. I mean, that feels like a 1978 problem that can easily be resolved now that basically every SEC stadium is selling alcohol. And so he has stepped in kind of he's put his foot in his mouth in a lot of these situations. And now to have this come out where he's actively undermining his basketball coach, that's just bad. Again, Calipari deserves a lot of blame for this situation at Kentucky. But do you think that whether it's Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Eric Musselman, Bruce Pearl, whomever, and I know Nick Saban's won more and Kirby Smart's won more of late, Eric Musselman too, Bruce Pearl too, whatever. But you think when they go to their AD for something that they deem important, Nick Saban doesn't have to beg. Nick Saban doesn't have to privately, maneuver around his AD to hope to raise funds. If he thinks he needs it to win at the highest level, he gets it. Same with Kirby Smart. Same with Bruce Pearl. Same with Eric Musselman. I just mentioned you. I could go on and on and on. In 2023 in the SEC, there's no excuse. There's plenty of money. There's more money than you can ever spend, and this falls on Mitch Barnhart. And I would add, as I conclude, it sets up a very precarious situation at Kentucky. Because to me, we've talked about the Calipari aspect of things, but it feels as though, I did a little straw poll of the fan base. I think everybody's frustrated with Calipari. It does feel like, though, especially after this article, that if the fan base had their druthers, one of two things would happen. One, either both would be gone. But if the fan base could only choose one, I got the sense that most of the fan base says, let's get rid of the AD. Let's give Calipari one more run with next year's 2024 recruiting class. And if it doesn't work out, then we go get the Scott Drew, who Kyle Tucker said would be the number one candidate, would go after the Brad Stevens, the Jay Wright, the Chris Holtman, whoever. And so I just bring all of this up to say it's setting up for a fascinating situation at Kentucky. I think one of the reasons you guys and girls like this show, even if you're not a Kentucky fan, you like this show because I take you behind the curtain of how college sports really is. And right now we have this weird tug of war at Kentucky where it does not appear as though the school president is on the side of the AD. It doesn't appear the AD is going to go. The basketball coach doesn't like the AD and the AD doesn't like the basketball coach, but I don't think the basketball coach is going anywhere. And so it's just a bad deal, man. It just, I think in society right now, we overuse the word toxic, Toxic. I think we overuse that word too much. This feels like a toxic situation with no winners. And unfortunately, by the way, a lot of student athletes get caught in the middle, and a lot of fans that just want to support their team are caught in the middle as well. I'll tell you this, whoever are the boots on the ground reporters, Kyle Tucker, all my KSR family, I worked at KSR for a number of years. I respect the hell out of everybody there. There should be there, and there will be some really tough questions asked the next time Mitch Barnhart has a media availability, because again, not removing blame from John Calipari, but when the AD is reportedly actively undermining the head coach, changes the conversation a lot on Kentucky. All right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to wrap Aaron right, Aaron wrong. We had a fun season of college football hot takes. Some of them were right, some of them were wrong. So we'll have fun. We'll do a season-ending Aaron right, Aaron wrong. Take a quick break. We'll be right back.